Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation.
Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia studios of Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, and we are wrapping up another weekend in general. And, of course, on this show, wrapping up another weekend of Braves baseball, another week of Braves baseball. And, unfortunately, I get to be the bearer of bad news on a Sunday yet again. And this is the kind of series that you're just going to look back on. I don't care if it's in March, April, May, June, July. Pick a month. Pick a month that they play baseball. These are the kind of series you don't want to look back on and think, what if? What if we had been able to sort that out? What if we'd taken 2 out of 3? You had to, I think, get more out of this might be the easiest way to say it. But when it comes to stacking the frustrations on what has been an already incredibly frustrating season for the Atlanta Braves, losing 2 out of 3 to a Pittsburgh Pirates team that was so bad they fired their manager basically a week into May, that's going to go on the list. List of gripes. The misery index, I used to have that. Used to be able to talk about that every October, and, well, maybe the last 3 Octobers we could add to the misery index. But fortunately, I haven't really had to pull that out too recently and think about it in perpetuity because the Braves have done at least a little bit of something right here in this decade. But before we get completely and totally off the rails because of one bad series in the month of May, I do think we need to maybe take the bigger picture look, the thing that I try to do, and put it into context and try to figure out what exactly it is has gone wrong. Because I think that we all know that there are certain things for the Atlanta Braves that are going pretty well right now. And I think we know that there are some other things that they're just not working. And when the thing that's just not working is your ability to outscore the opposition, you are going to have a very difficult time winning games, one would say. And one would be right. But there are some interesting things inside the stats for this club, which I guess make it only that much more frustrating because this is a team that has done a fair amount of winning here over the last 3, almost 4 weeks. But they've also lost some games, like the one in Colorado when you had a chance to sweep what could be an historically bad team that we'll talk about later on in the show that had a historically bad day yesterday. And then a team like the Pittsburgh Pirates that came in 12-26, had just fired Derek Shelton, first managerial firing of the year. We're finally seeing that. Some hitting coaches, some managers, some pitching coaches going to be on the block. Clubs are going to get a little bit impatient. When you're off to a 12-26 start, it's pretty easy to see that there's a good reason to be pretty impatient if you're the Pittsburgh Pirates. But as we'll talk about later on, their problems are a little bit different than what the Braves are dealing with. But this was a very frustrating weekend, to say the very least. And the Braves, they're just on this strange journey through 2025. That's how I would size it up. I mean, since the bad start, it's been much better. And that's all relative, I guess, and record-wise, you are seeing this improvement, but there's just so much inconsistency that is plaguing this club. At times, it's the starting pitching, and then they figure it out, which they have lately. We'll talk a lot about that on this show. Then it's the bullpen, which is the culprit, and the, I don't know what you want to call it, the whipping boy for a lot of folks as far as the different positional areas of this team. That's the one that's going to catch a lot of grief. Because, we had a lead, they gave it up, the bullpen's bad. Sometimes that is the case. Sometimes it's just not their day. And as I talked about, I want to say with Dukes and Bell this week, but it might have been one of the other shows. I don't know. I talk about the Braves an awful lot. It kind of runs together at times, and I want to go ahead and tell you that since about May 1st of last year, just about every series and everything and every month of Braves baseball is starting to run together because we're seeing this kind of inconsistency. But when it comes to the bullpen, the more relievers you have to use on any given day only ups the chances that one of those guys doesn't have it. And that's not unique to the Braves. That's for all 30 clubs to contend with. And when you talk about just trying to get 5-6 innings out of your starting pitcher and then turn it over to that group, it's just going to make it a little bit more difficult. But that's just kind of a philosophical outlook of it. But I think the Braves bullpen has pitched pretty well, especially lately, with one notable exception being Raisel Iglesias. That, at best, has been a mixed bag this year, and we'll have to talk about Iglesias more as it goes on, because in the loss to the Pittsburgh Pirates on Sunday, the Braves had tried to give him a little bit of a reset, physically, mentally, maybe both. And then he had to come into a tie game against, again, a not great team, and the Braves lost a 4-3 game and thus lost 2 out of 3 to the Pittsburgh Pirates, who had not won a series since, I want to say, the second week of April. I mean, they came into this series with 12 wins on the year. So winning too many weren't going to be in the cards for a club, which, again, was undergoing a managerial change and, I guess, trying to spark any kind of movement that it could in the midst of an already lost season for them. The homestand for the Braves, though, was a mixed bag. Sure, they went 4-3, and if I told you coming in, you're going to play 7 games against the Reds and the Dodgers, you're going to go 4-3. I think most fans would sign up for that and be pretty happy with it. There would be some that would say, well, why can't we go 5-2? And they wouldn't be wrong. Why can't you go 5-2? Well, if you win a couple of close games, you might have had a chance to go 5-2, but 4-3 a winning homestand, that certainly, I think, had the Braves headed in the right direction, and they needed to capitalize on that momentum. And this, as much as anything, I think, is what has plagued this club this year. Just about the time they get something rolling, they get a little bit of a good thing going, they stub their toe. They fall down again. They take a step back, or maybe 2 steps back in the case of losing a series like this to a club as bad as the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's a long season, and there will be somewhere in here a winning streak that will work itself out. They'll win 6 out of 7. Maybe they'll win 7 or 8 in a row at some point. Doesn't seem like it right now, but I'm sure that most clubs over the course of the year, they use that to even out, stumbling out of the gates and going 0-7 to start the year, which the Braves definitely did, and it definitely dug them a big hole, and now they're in what I'm going to call a fight for 500. It should have already happened. It could have already happened, at least 3 times in the last week, if not more. And you just look at those as kind of this little missed opportunities. Now, sure, they could get to 500 and then lose the next day and drop back below 500. But I just wanted them to find that little checkpoint where they could say, all right, we started off terribly, as bad as it gets. I mean, it was 7 losses. You lost a starting pitcher for maybe the rest of the year. Your left fielder got suspended. I mean, I don't think you could have wrote much of a worse start to the season than the Atlanta Braves went on. But since then, they have gone 19-14. And they played, in some of those games, as though they could have won a couple of more. Maybe they would be at 500 right now or above 500. But we all know it's going to take a lot more than being a 500 club to do what the Braves have set out to do what they have done every year since 2018, and that's make the postseason and have that chance to maybe be the hot team at the right time and have a little bit of something they experienced in 2021. But as I often say, especially this time of year, we're a long way to October, and it is a long road to get to October. But the Braves have turned some things around, and there have been reasons for that. But the main thing not helping this club right now is the offensive performance, and I don't know if you like stats or not. I do. I follow baseball, so I guess I have to like stats. It's kind of written into the code there. And every time I sit down and try to, put together my notes and my thoughts to start a show like this, I always think, and Vince Scully put this out there, the statistics shouldn't be the main story. They're just kind of the garnish for the story. Now, that is a play-by-play mentality. And as somebody who did some play-by-play in the minor leagues, what feels like longer and longer ago because it is, I always appreciated that. Because you never want just to hit somebody in the face with the numbers. But I think that these numbers are starting to become alarming enough that they're hitting folks in the face by themselves. I don't know that I really need to be the bearer of this bad news, but I have compiled a list of what's been going on in the Braves starting lineup, at least in the month of May, and in some cases a little bit longer, because the components that are not firing, the cylinders that are not firing for this club, they're going to have to. And I don't think it matters what order you put these guys in. You're going to have certain guys just playing up to their norms, because when this many guys are playing as poorly as they've been playing and it starts to stack and compound, that's when you end up with a lineup like the Atlanta Braves have that should be better, definitely could be better, but will they figure this out? And will they get these components going? Because it's not just one guy. And I know right now the popular candidate for the guy who's really dragging the offense down is Ozzie Albies. Not far behind him, I think Michael Harris has gotten a lot of the grief this year. Matt Olson has certainly gotten some of it. Catching-wise, I think a lot of folks had a lot of questions about Sean Murphy coming into the year based on how bad he was in 2024, but I think he's made some contributions, and a pretty big one on Sunday to give the Braves a chance to win a game. He's also, I believe, still leading the club in homers, despite the fact that he missed several weeks at the start of the year. So there are highlights in here. And maybe I'm trying to talk myself into this, but to bring this all the way back around to when I prepare for a show, how exactly I prepare for a show, it's never to flood you with numbers. But we're going to have to get into the numbers of what's not going right in the Braves lineup because, spoiler alert, it's a lot of different things. And it also includes not just the 30,000-foot view of what the numbers are collectively and individually, but what they are doing and the opportunities they have to get the big hit at the right time. Now, I'll stipulate, they had a big one on Sunday. A big bases-clearing double off the bench. Sean Murphy comes through, makes it a 3-3 game, gives the Braves a chance to kind of salvage that final game of that series against the Pirates in what looked like was going to be headed towards the series loss with little if no fight at all. And it changed just there for a little bit. Gave you that glimmer of hope. But sometimes that glimmer of hope is almost worse in some cases. I don't know. I'll leave you to figure that out. I guess that's subjective. But the main thing that this club is not doing right at this moment is finding a way to put runs on the board. The rotation has been pretty solid. I think the bullpen, with Iglesias, obviously the guy we got to talk about a little bit more as the show goes on, has done a pretty nice job of keeping games at least manageable. But as I talked about, after that 0-7 trip to start the year, the Braves are 19-14. They're 14-8 now over the last 22 games, so they're winning despite some issues. But they're winning right now, I think, in large part because of what their pitching is doing. That is kind of what's carrying this club at this moment. So we got a lot to dive into on this show. We'll talk about some notable returns for this team, some returns that could very much provide, if nothing else, some emotional energy and a jolt. But they should also be pretty good when we get into that whole statistical conversation. One of them, of course, is Spencer Strider. He might be back by the end of the week. That can make a pitching staff that's throwing well right now just a little bit stronger. The other side of that coin, of course, is Ronald Acuña Jr. Could he be on a rehab assignment at some point in the coming week? Could he be back with this club by the time the month comes to a close, or at the very least, the early part of June? That would be a sight for sore eyes because this offense needs all the help that it can get, and I'll talk a little bit about the timelines for both of those men as we go along. We'll dive into This Week in Braves Baseball. We'll discuss these offensive struggles. We'll get into some key members of this lineup that just aren't playing up to expectation, their own or the outside either. And we'll hear from several members of the Atlanta rotation. And I'll visit with Eno Ceres of The Athletic to find out how much the strike zone has changed in 2025 and what the future of balls and strikes being called in the major leagues just might be. That'll come your way in the second hour when we take our trip around the big leagues. But up next, we'll get into This Week in Braves Baseball as we continue on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Now, back to more From the Diamond. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back in to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. It is a Sunday. These are the Kia Studios in Midtown. The Braves are done with their business in Pittsburgh, and unfortunately, the bad news is they lost 2 out of 3 to one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball right now. The good news, I guess if there is any, is that they can jump on the plane and come on home and maybe get back on track against the Washington Nationals, who will roll into Truist Park for 4 games beginning on Monday. And we will, of course, talk to you about that. We'll be talking to you about the Red Sox series this weekend that could see a very notable return for the Atlanta Braves. In fact, we'll be hearing from that man. It is Spencer Strider, who threw another bullpen over the weekend, and thumbs up, it sounds like, from the Braves righty for that one. And we'll talk about the pitching, and we'll talk about the upcoming series and some of the other things that have been going on with the Atlanta Braves. But I don't know what else we can talk about when it comes to trying to find what ails this team than the offense. The offense is the story. It's kind of been the story. And we're really pushing at least a calendar year's worth of the Braves offense not being able to produce at the level in which you would expect. I believe I saw it a little bit earlier today that the Braves, coming into Sunday anyway, had posted an ERA just south of 3.50 and an 81-81 record over that time. Now, what does that point to? Really good pitching, for one thing. You're lucky to be at 500. But it points to an offense that has been unable to back up that pitching because the Braves led Major League Baseball in ERA last year. And I'll get into it a little bit later. This pitching staff over the last 2, almost 3 weeks is pretty much treading that same line or towing that same line that they were a year ago. So the offense That's the issue. And it doesn't take me on my own show to tell you that it's the issue. If you've watched this team this year, then you already know it. The Braves offense has not lived up to its expectations. Their own, or, again, the ones from outside, the external expectations. And it goes beyond not having Ronald Acuña Jr. We can't talk about that anymore, and I don't think we've been able to talk about that for a while. Will it help to get Ronald back? Yes. Yes, I believe it will. I need to sort that whole thing out. But I think this is even beyond lineup construction to a certain extent, which has been a big conversation lately. And, the questions are, how bad has it been for the Braves lineup collectively speaking? As of Saturday, that's coming into Sunday, where the Braves lost by a 4-3 score against the Pirates, the only National League teams to score fewer runs this year than the Atlanta Braves were the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Colorado Rockies. The Braves did take 2 out of 3 in Colorado, but they had Chris Sale on the mound in Game 3 and lost 2-1 against the Rockies. And I don't want to jump ahead too far on my show sheet here. The Rockies lost 21-0 yesterday. 21-0. Just want to point that out. This is not a good club. Historically speaking, it's not a good club, and we will talk about that more later. But the Braves lineup, there are a lot of reasons why it is what it is right now, and what it is not what you need. So let's talk about lately for some of these Braves hitters. This is as of Saturday, so coming into Sunday, where the Braves were able to score 3 runs, but in large part, it's only really going to affect the hitting line for one of these Braves hitters because the rest of them weren't really as involved in the run scoring. It was Sean Murphy who drove in all 3 runs, and he did so as a pinch hitter for Drake Baldwin. And he did that in the 8th inning with a 3-run double. Again, the Braves lost by a 4-3 score, but overall, Ozzie Albies last 7 games, 2 for his last 27 with 2 singles, 1 run knocked in, 2 runs scored. Alex Verdugo is 1 for his last 24 now and has scored 2 runs. That's his last 6 games. His first 14 games with the Braves, he was batting .322, and it looked like the Braves had leadoff all figured out. But, hey, it's a long season for a reason, and that means both the good and the bad are going to come your way. And right now for Verdugo, bit of a course correction at this point. Sean Murphy coming into the day, and again, 3-run double off the bench for him. That's a big one because these are his first RBIs of the month. He was hitting a .154 with no homers, no runs knocked in, 1 run scored, and 10 punch-outs this month. That's an OPS of .459 if you were scoring at home. That's not a very good one. Now, Drake Baldwin, on the other hand, had 2 more hits on Sunday and continues to rake. He is now batting well over .400 in 11 games started as the Braves catcher this year. Now, does that mean you bench Sean Murphy? Well, of course not. But it would mean, I think, you got to find ways to get Drake Baldwin as many at-bats as you can, because I think we've seen with this kid, this is not just some rookie that was getting lucky and hot for a little while. He has a great plan, a great approach at the plate. He has taken advantage of his starts. He's also shown that he can handle this pinch hitting thing too. So I've been impressed with him. Now then you have to get into some of the Braves regulars who are going to simply have to do more. Michael Harris is one of those. He's had some key hits and some big runs knocked in. Let's not get lost, in the forest for the trees, however that saying goes or applies here. I think you know what I mean. But last 10 games for him, batting a .183, no runs scored. Harris is a guy that makes things happen with his legs, right? Running the bases, stealing some bases, taking the extra base, whatever the case may be. And he's playing a great center field, so he's keeping some runs off the board. But the fact that Michael Harris hasn't scored a run in nearly 2 weeks, that's a little bit alarming. He was 1 for 4 today. He did not score a run. Matt Olson's last 8 games coming in, batting a .167, couple of homers, 5 runs knocked in, scuffling since his 20-game on-base streak ended. And again, that was 9 games ago. Now here's another one, Marcell Ozuna. This was a guy that, if you look at the overall season numbers, you might be a little bit surprised to see it. But has not homered now in 13, make it 14 games, and is batting a .182 with 2 runs knocked in over that 2+ week stretch. You got Marcell Ozuna driving in 2 runs over a 2-week stretch. Your offense is, once again, missing a very big piece. And he's the one guy that I come closest to giving a pass for these kinds of things because he's carried the club on his back, seemingly, since about April or May of last year. So he's entitled to have a couple of weeks where maybe he's not the central guy. But he's not been able to bail you out either. Nick Allen came into the day hitting 160. Picked up a couple of hits today. Did get thrown out trying to steal a base. But we'll talk about what Nick Allen has done for this club, and it's defensively speaking, being one of the best players in the field at any position in baseball. So you're getting something there. Now, who are the exceptions to the rule, at least in the month of May? How about Eli White, who came into the day with an 8-game hitting streak that was snapped today, and Austin Riley, whose 8-game hitting streak was snapped yesterday and picked up a base hit and scored a run today. So you haven't really had much in terms of the production that you need. Eli White and Austin Riley are the only guys that have been, really offensively speaking, a net positive for this club, and the only two guys that this month are batting over 200 that are starting on a regular basis. But throw Drake Baldwin into that mix too, because again, I think he's certainly shown that he can provide you something at the plate. But that's a rundown of the entire Braves lineup. And then you start to talk about, well, when it comes to runners in scoring position, what's going on? Coming into Sunday, and the Braves were 1 for 3 with runners in scoring position on Sunday. Let me go ahead and throw that out there. But over the last 9 games coming in, Atlanta was hitting 149. That's 10 for 67 with runners in scoring position. And if you're not just completely and totally overloaded by the stats here, well, I'll try again next week. But that's just a look at what's under the hood for the Braves offense right now. And I'm not sure really what system you can look at first to say, okay, we'll change this component. All right, well, now we need to run a test on this, and now we need to plug this in different. And Brian Snitker has changed the lineup some, but for the most part, I really feel like it gets down to the point of you have certain guys that have to produce. It doesn't matter if they're batting second or third or fourth or fifth, sixth or seventh. I mean, making a couple of swaps here is not what's ailing the Braves. It's not, well, the manager didn't pull the right strings. If you want to look at it on Sunday, he did pull the right strings when he finally got a chance to do some quote-unquote managing, and that was in the 8th inning when he pinch hit for Drake Baldwin. And when he pinch ran for Marcell Ozuna, let's throw that out there, because Ozuna ain't scoring from first on that double by Murphy. But then Murphy comes through with a 3-run double. So some things happened, some things worked in that regard. But for the most part, this is a club that basically has not been able to do what it needs to do. Runners in scoring position over the last 10 games now, only the Pittsburgh Pirates have been worse. That club just took 2 out of 3 from you. And so that math for the Braves ain't mathing. So if we look at this, what can help this club? If it's not change the lineup, which it's not. If it's not make 7 trades, which I'm going to encourage you to believe that it's not, Ronald Acuña Jr. coming back could be helpful. The latest on him, which, again, isn't necessarily a firm timeline, but he should begin a rehab assignment sometime this month. And hold your laughter. I know. There's a lot of May that's left, and that's not a promise or a threat. It's just a fact. There's a lot of this month that's left, but getting Ronald Acuña Jr. out on that rehab assignment as soon as possible is the ideal situation for him and for the team. And I think that a lot of people were a little bit confused, and I don't blame them, on was there a trip to L.A. that he's not going on? That's correct. He doesn't need to go back out and have his knee checked again. The Braves had just talked about the possibility of that, but Ronald is continuing to work on all the base running and outfield work and all the running drills that he needs to do to get ready for that rehab assignment, which I believe would have to last at least 10 games or 2 weeks to get him up to speed before you're going to think about putting him back out on the field so that he has the time to prepare for it adequately. But if you look at it last time, and this is why the Ronald Acuña Jr. timetable has been so murky thus far this year. It's not because he had a different injury, a worse injury, a reoccurrence of an injury. Knock on wood, hopefully he doesn't have to talk about any of that stuff at any point now or in the future. But the last time he came back in basically 10 months from his torn ACL. That was in the right knee. This time it's going to be a full year for Acuña, basically. So it seems like everyone kind of learned from that. Why rush him back? Getting him into, I think, the summer months is a little bit helpful in my mind. I mean, maybe that's anecdotal, I don't know. But having the opportunity to take the extra time that he needs to make sure that now they can kind of manage that workload, because when he came back at the end of April in 2022 and moving forward, it seemed like he was constantly having to manage the pain level of his knee, because he was. And then he wrote that big article in the Players Tribune about what was going on with the knee. And, I talked to Ronald some over the years. It was clearly a problem, clearly bothering him. And even when he said, hey, I'm 100%. I think you're as close to the version of 100% as you can be at certain times of the season. I don't think anybody's 100% after opening day. I just think that that's just how it works. Your body starts to feel the toll of how much you've been playing, and if you haven't done it in a year at the level that these guys do it, you're going to feel it a different way. And I think Ronald did, but I think that there's been some things learned from that. I also think that it's good that this particular ACL is obviously not a reoccurrence of the other one, but it's the front leg rather than the back leg. So perhaps when it comes to the weight distribution, hitting, this has been at least a little bit more favorable for him and will be moving forward. Now, what's it going to do for him as far as breakaway speed and all those kinds of things? We're going to see what version of Ronald Acuña Jr. comes back. But somebody that can steady the lineup and give them a chance, or the leadoff spot, I should say, and give them a chance to be set up for the best possible outcome, sounds like a pretty good guy to have walking through the door. And hopefully for Ronald, it will be happening at some point in the next 3 or so weeks, 3-4 weeks, something like that. Now, what can the Braves do in the meantime? Because guessing what the batting order is going to be before Acuña gets back is kind of a flawed exercise. Alex Verdugo has certainly cooled off at the top of the order, and that's the guy that's got to set the table here. But like we've talked about already, certain Braves have to deliver more than they are right now. So that's on Matt Olson, Ozzie Albies, Michael Harris, Marcell Ozuna, Sean Murphy, Austin Riley, Drake Baldwin, all the way on down the line. It's going to take a group effort for this. It's not on Eli White and Nick Allen, who are a couple of guys who are a great story this year. White doing it at the plate, Nick Allen at a high level in the field. But those are not the guys that you're hanging your hat on when it comes to leading the offense. Now, Drake Baldwin continues to be one of the better hitters on this team. 2 more hits on Sunday, and he has been great when he's gotten the chance to start, as we talked about. And he's also shown that he can handle this pinch hitting assignment. So there's a lot to like when it comes to Drake Baldwin. But for the Braves offense, the answer is a little bit more complicated than just get Ronald Acuña Jr. back. It's how do we get 5, 6 high-level players, all-star players, back to the level that they were at prior to that. And that's what they're going to have to figure out sooner than later, because the manager's not going to be able to just reorganize these guys, reorder this lineup, and get the outcome that you're looking for. When we come back, we will get into more of This Week in Braves baseball, but we will turn to the other side of the equation. That's the pitching, and hear from 3 members of the Braves rotation: Spencer Strider, Bryce Elder, A.J. Smith-Shawver. That's next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Now, more From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer from Mark Spain Real Estate. 855-299-SOLD on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game here on a Sunday night as we wrap up what was a disappointing weekend for the Atlanta Braves as they lost 2 out of 3 to the Pittsburgh Pirates on this brief trip away. And now they'll return home and try to get back on the winning track against the Washington Nationals, a club that has, I think, shown some fight this year, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later. But as I think we just learned over the weekend, you really can't overlook anybody in a series or over the course of a Major League Baseball season. They're all professionals, and even the best laid plans don't go accordingly, as the game is not played on paper. So if you're all done with the cliches, I know I am, let's talk about some things that may actually improve the Braves' chances of winning over the long term, or that have improved the Braves' chances of winning thus far this year and really over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and that's the starting rotation. Now, this is a group that has really, I think, had to band together based on a few different factors. We could go back to the winter, but I'll make it brief. You lost about 320, 330 innings of Max Fried and Charlie Morton over the offseason. Then you come right into the year and you lose All-Star Reynaldo Lopez for what could be the entire season. And you haven't had Spencer Strider back nearly as much as you thought you would, because he's thrown exactly 5 innings before having to go back on the injured list. So you start doing the math. This is a Braves rotation that has very much had a lot of making up to do when it comes to the innings, if nothing else. But some quality has started to show up. I think Chris Sale has started to find himself. Spencer Schwellenbach started out well, went through a rough patch. Looks like maybe he's back on the right track again. And then it's the group that we start talking about after that. No, not Spencer Strider, who we'll hear from in just a moment. But how about Bryce Elder? Not really in anybody's plans, not on their bingo card. Didn't break camp with the club, but is factoring in here lately and giving the Braves some quality starts. Grant Holmes made the club out of spring training and has been a good factor in this rotation as well. And then you got A.J. Smith-Shawver, the youngster of the group, who is now all of a sudden showing what he is capable of. So this rotation, even without Strider, has been able to show what it's capable of, at least in the short term. Now, can they continue to do this moving forward? That's going to be a big question, and obviously would help the Braves' chances immensely as they try to figure it out offensively. But I think we can all agree that getting Strider back is a big step in the right direction. It's an emotional boost. I think it should be a statistical boost, but we're going to find out how soon that could be, and we needed some clarity over the weekend. So Strider, through his second bullpen of the week, doing so on Saturday in Pittsburgh and reporting that he felt pretty good after that. Had a chance to catch up with Spencer prior to the trip when he threw his first bullpen, just to get a little bit of his thoughts and his thought process on how exactly he's approaching this return and how exactly he's feeling after that first bullpen. So take a listen to the comments from Spencer Strider from this week at Truist Park.
We're able to keep throwing throughout this process, which was good. Made some modifications, obviously, just on from a knee and different things, but with the pulse monitor, that band I wear, or been wearing, it's very easy to monitor workload and handle things like that. So it was good to keep the floor high. I think that'll make the next, part of the process a lot easier, and we'll be more confident in the decisions we make. But I felt great and definitely feel good about where I'm at.
As we know by now, that bullpen was just the first major step. There was another one to take place on Saturday, which Spencer Strider will comment about in a moment. Of course, these comments happening before he threw Saturday in Pittsburgh, where all systems appear to be go, but the Braves are going to have to weigh their decision. It may not surprise you, though, to know that Spencer Strider is a little bit more anxious, perhaps, than maybe even he was after the year-long absence, because, hey, he did all that work, finally got back, only got one start, and now it feels like making up for lost time again. Strider discussed the timeline moving forward and his mindset around this latest return.
We've had some conversations. I, for better or worse, feel ready to go. So, it's probably fortunate that it's not in my hands entirely. So we're going to throw a bullpen on Saturday in Pittsburgh and kind of make a decision from there as to what we do next. But like I said, having kept throwing, I think that makes things a little bit easier to map out. So we've got to take it, day by day. I know it's cliche, but I've been instructed that that's the right thing to do. So, so that's where we're at.
Well, there's absolutely no way that Strider wanted to go back on the injured list, but there was some opportunity to be found in the misfortune, and one of those things was having the opportunity to work on a few more things that will get him back to feeling more like himself in the long run.
It's kind of a beneficial opportunity to have my arm built up all the way to actually get to work on some stuff. So, the rehab process, your throws are obviously extremely limited and regimented. You spend so much time at a lower intensity, there's not that opportunity where you're fully built up, you can work on stuff without preparing for a bullpen, a live, whatever it may be. So to have essentially 2 weeks to work on my upper half timing and arm path and some different stuff with quite a bit of a quantity of throws each day at a high intensity was a good opportunity. So felt like I made some progress there and definitely saw some benefits in that in my bullpen yesterday. And like I said, I feel really good about where I'm at, feel healthy. So it's just being smart and listening to the experts and, not getting too ahead of myself.
It's pretty easy to see that the competitor in Spencer Strider is still on display even when he's unable to take the ball every fifth day. That, of course, though, is exactly what he's aiming to do, and he wants to do that sooner than later. But as you've heard, this is a collaborative process, and while Strider may be feeling like that next start could come immediately, the club still wanted to take some time, have that bullpen that he threw on Saturday in Pittsburgh, where he also reported feeling good, and now have all that information that they need and make that decision.
I've talked about it. Snit and I've talked about it. My job is never to pull my own reins. I mean, I'm going to pitch until they take the ball out of my hand, and it's going to take quite a bit to keep me off the mound. So that's my job. That's how I see it. And so my job is not to make advanced medical diagnosis and structure rehab programs. That my job's to do them. So of course they want my input, and they get my input, whether they want it or not, really. But it's kind of how I operate. But I need to listen to them, and we need to be smart. And just as the case was, a month, 2 months ago when I was feeling good and looking good in spring, we're thinking about the long run, and this is a much longer process than the 3-4 weeks it ends up being in hindsight. So the irrationality and the quick decision at this moment can cost you a lot in the future, and so that's what they're there for, and my job is to try to follow along and do my part.
Well, the last thing anybody wants is a misstep here, a misfire, a setback, any of those things. And so managing all of that in this return timetable is obviously the utmost importance for Strider and the utmost importance for the team itself. And as you can hear, the decision-making process for this, it's not simply, feeling good, let's get on back out there. The Braves are going to take all the time that they need to determine that Strider is ready to go again when he is. But that doesn't mean that Spencer Strider is enjoying this ride taking longer than he wants it to. Keep in mind, he just spent just over a year trying to get his way back, got to throw exactly 5 innings, and then cool his heels on the injured list again. As you might imagine, even after that first bullpen, Spencer Strider was raring to get back in there and have the opportunity to help his team win.
In my perfect world, we wouldn't be throwing another bullpen, but again, it's probably a good thing that I'm not making the decision. So I, of course, feel bad taking another 5 minutes, let alone another week or 2 weeks. But like I said, I need to let the long-term vision and the people who are more capable of making that plan have that control, and just do what I can within those parameters on a daily basis. So.
And as you can hear, Spencer Strider, the competitor, still in there, ready to get back on the mound, ready to do his thing again, but trying to exercise caution as they go about doing it. Again, the good report over the weekend is that Strider's Saturday session went well, and he could return as soon as Friday against the Boston Red Sox. The Braves have named their 4 starters for the National Series. Could we see Spencer Strider on the mound in Fenway Park? Definitely maybe. So we'll find out this week. The rotation, though, in Strider's stead and in trying to put together 5 guys that can give the Braves a chance to win has taken a few different forms. Because, again, you got Chris Sale, you got Spencer Schwellenbach, but after that, all bets were off once you lost Reynaldo Lopez. You're going to have to fill 3 spots with Strider still out at the start of the season, and the Braves have done that pretty well. We've talked a lot about Grant Holmes. We've heard from Grant Holmes on the show not too long ago about this opportunity for him, and I think by and large, he's pitched pretty well. He's pitched well enough to keep the Braves in the game, and I think that in and of itself is what you're asking for out of these guys. But the others on this list are maybe a little bit surprising in one case, and maybe in the other, it's kind of that wait and see. You're excited to see exactly what he can become. I'm talking about Bryce Elder and A.J. Smith-Shawver. I had a chance to catch up with both of them this week, and for Elder, when you think about what he has had to go through, and I asked Brian Snitker about how meaningful the innings he's thrown have been, and he said it's huge for us. And it kind of feels like the scenario of 2023 when he didn't make the club out of spring training, was the opening day starter for the Gwinnett Stripers, but Max Fried went on the IL, and up came Bryce Elder, who proceeded to have a very good year. Last year, though, forgettable, so I asked Bryce Elder a little bit about what has been his mindset and his journey over the past year plus, so let me share with you my conversation with Braves starter Bryce Elder.
It seems like you found some real, I think, consistency maybe in the repertoire, maybe mechanically just comfortable, knowing where you're starting every 5th day, that kind of thing. How would you describe this last 3-4 weeks?
I mean, I think it's been a lot better. I think even the first 3 that I had where I was giving up runs, I thought there was still a lot of good stuff there, and I thought there was a few runs I gave up there that, if something bounces a little different direction, I don't think they look like that. So obviously I've been kind of seeing more of those results that I thought were coming the past few starts. But I mean, I felt good. I think, getting in the routine again of throwing every 5th day and kind of getting on a plan of how we're going to, attack certain hitters and just kind of being on the same page with Murph and Baldy, and kind of when you're around them a lot, you kind of get into that groove. And so I've been pleased with how it's been.
You're a guy who's now got a lot of experience under your belt. There's the highs, the lows, everything in between, the adjustments that are made to get back to, I guess, the previous highs that you felt. When you went into the winter, for example, what kind of things were you focused on to come back into this year to give yourself that best chance to be the best version of you?
Well, I think last year, obviously it didn't go the way I wanted. I just flat out sucked. But with that here, at least, I think there were some times in AAA, and obviously that's not where you want to be, but I thought there were some positive things in AAA. I think at the end of the year with the 3.7, that's not just lighting the world on fire, but I mean, you're still throwing some good innings when you throw 100 and however many innings with 3.7. So I think I kind of chased some wrong things last year. Chased kind of how I threw before rather than just worrying about today and tomorrow. And so I think I just kind of had a little reset this offseason and kind of figured out, here's my plan moving forward. Can't do nothing about when I was good in the past or when I was bad in the past. Let's figure out what's the best approach moving forward, and let's stick to it. And that's what I've done so far, and it's been working. And obviously it's so early. We got a lot more work to do. So it's been good. I'm looking forward to keep going. You talked a little bit about the catchers, and that partnership obviously is a big part of the success and execution of the game plan, working with Rick Kranitz. Anybody else that's kind of helped be a sounding board, if nothing else? I mean, you don't have to break it all down and change everything just to get back to a certain result, but who would you say has been kind of influential in helping you find where you are right now? Yeah, I mean, I think, Tex in AAA, Kaneko Teixeira. I'm really close with him. He's always a good person to talk to. Granny, the catchers. I mean, we got a pretty good group here. You just kind of listen and pay attention. You're always going to, pick up on something, and just working with them, bouncing ideas off them, bouncing ideas off me, and just kind of getting to a good flow and in a good spot right now.
Last one for you. The rotation as a whole, especially over the last 10 days, couple of weeks, really seems to be finding its legs. I know there's been, some interchangeable pieces that's not part of the plan, but you kind of got to seize the day, like you said. What's the overall mindset for yourself and maybe for the group as you go out there and try to give the club the best opportunity to win each day?
Well, ultimately, I think that's the goal. It doesn't matter who's pitching, who's starting, who comes in the bullpen. We got to, give our guys the best chance we can to win. If we give up 5 one day and grind out 6 innings and the guys end up scoring 7, well, it's not pretty, but we give ourselves a chance to win, and that's to me that's always the goal. I have one goal at the beginning every year, and it's give the team a chance to win every time out. Whatever else happens, and I think that's the same for everybody. If us 5, I guess 6 with stride, give us a chance to win. That's about all you can ask for.
Yeah, and the Braves starting rotation has been doing pretty well here lately. Another big piece of that, of course, was A.J. Smith-Shawver, who continues to pile up good starts at the big league level, flirted with a no-hitter in his most recent outing at Truist Park. You had to feel pretty good about what A.J. Smith-Shawver is doing, so I caught up with the young righty to get his thoughts on what's a pretty good run in a very young career, with hopefully much more to come this year.
I know last year, developmentally speaking, you were working on a lot of things. You didn't get to do as much up here as you wanted to, but how beneficial was everything that you did over the course of 24 to get you ready for this opportunity in 25?
I think just every time that I can get out there on the mound and get some experience and kind of learn myself more and more, and just be around people that push me and have the right information for me to kind of grow from that, I think that's been huge. And really just taking the time to assess my strengths and weaknesses and what I need to work on has been a big thing for me, and being able to reflect on that and knowing what to work on going forward and through each and every bullpen.
What kind of feedback have you gotten for your arsenal? Obviously, you've got a big fastball. You've got a very dynamic pitch in the splitter as well. It seems like you lean very heavily on those two because there's a lot of success in that. But how have you found the balance of the usage of those two?
Yeah, it's just letting every pitch kind of work for itself. So just being able to throw with everything, with the fastball, curveball, slider, changeup, mixing up the speeds of it, the tunnels, and just kind of really figuring out how to pitch has been my main thing. I feel like I just used to throw it and just try to put my best stuff in the zone, but whenever you kind of can tunnel the pitches and let them work for each other, I feel like that's when you have a little bit more success.
Last one for you. You're part of a rotation here that is trying to put some things together. Obviously, there have been some pieces that have been taken off the table, like Ronaldo. Spencer's on his road back with yourself, Bryce Elder, Grant Holmes, obviously with Sale and Schwellenbach as well. How strong do you guys feel as a group to be able to kind of overcome the adversity that's been thrown at you collectively?
Yeah, I feel like we're all best friends in here. We're hanging out every single day. We all want each other to do well. And it's just great to get to hang out with a bunch of your buddies every day and play baseball. So we're just really fortunate, and I think that we make the most of it and have a good time while we're out here.
Well, I think that A.J. Smith-Shawver has been making the most of his opportunity, most certainly. We'll talk a little bit more about what's going on with the Atlanta Braves, but when we come back on From the Diamond, we're going to get into what else is happening across Major League Baseball. And, man, I got some good ones for this week, as there were no shortage of crazy things going on. We'll talk about it next as From the Diamond with Grant McAuley continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond. Baseball with From the Diamond. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We are live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday night, putting a bow on the weekend. Also, maybe just giving ourselves a little bit of a break from what's going on with the Atlanta Braves or what went on Sunday, and taking a look at what else is happening across the world of baseball. Sometimes that's important. I like to at least mix this into the show and start the second hour with it. So here goes nothing. And actually, there's more than nothing going on here. This is one of the more busy and exciting and fun weeks that I've had in terms of just pulling stories and having a lot to talk about. But I will stipulate not all of this is good stuff. And we'll start with perhaps one of the most perplexing things that we have seen recently between a player and a team. And yeah, there's discord. There's things that goes on between an organization and a club. I think we got a little bit of a taste of that with Ronald Acuña Jr. and Jared Kelenic and that whole thing. But I digress. What else has been going on in other places that might have attracted a little bit more attention, because it didn't just come from a tweet. It came from actual post-game comments. But wait a minute. It may not be exactly what you thought that it was. Rafael Devers, I think this was well documented back in spring training after the Astros signed Alex Bregman, was going to lose his position at third base because Bregman is the better fielder, and Devers, at that point, was not really feeling it, but he got over it. And they had to talk about it, and they had to work their way through it, and I'm really skipping over a lot here. But for context, let's just say this is not the first time that the Red Sox have had to talk to Rafael Devers about what position he's going to play, or that maybe they just don't want him to play a position at all and just concentrate on hitting where he is very good. Not as good in the field, very good at the plate. But now the Red Sox have a need at another position because Tristan Casas is going to be out for a while. So could Rafael Devers play first base is what brings all of this up. And in Thursday's post-game availability, speaking through an interpreter, Devers was attributed a lot of quotes that got a lot of people's attention. I'm going to read a couple of them to you because they certainly had my eyebrow raising, because you just always think that, hey, you know what? A teammate goes down, the other teammate may just jump in there because, hey, the other guys need me. I bet I got to do everything I can. And this pretty much read as the exact opposite for Rafael Devers. So here's the first quote. They had a conversation with me about moving to first base. I don't think for me personally it's the best decision after they asked me to play a different position, and I only have 2 months of playing this position. And he's talking about DH, which isn't really a position, but be that as it may. Continuing the quote, to all of a sudden have me to try to play another position from my end, it doesn't seem like a good decision. Now that to me just reads more as an honest appraisal of the situation of, hey, I've kind of been jerked around here a little bit, and I'm not sure that, trying a new position on the fly is really the best for me. That's fair. I don't really feel like he's out of bounds there, but it kind of started to go awry a little bit later. I know I'm a ball player, but at the same time, they can't expect me to play every single position out there. In spring training, they talked to me and basically told me to put away my glove, that I wasn't going to play any other position but DH. So right now, I just feel like it's not an appropriate decision by them to ask me to play another position. And this is where the road starts to diverge, to where you start to think, okay, well, at that time, they plan to have Tristan Casas at first base. Plans change. Can you be the teammate that steps into that spot? I think that's a fair ask. Now, is it the ultimate solution, the best solution? Maybe not. But you just have to figure out a way to get through it. Continuing on from Rafael Devers, as quoted by multiple outlets, including the Associated Press, where I pulled this from. They told me they didn't want to allow me to play any other position, and now I think they should do their job and essentially hit the market and look for another player to play first base. I'm not sure why they want me to be in between the way that they have me now. Now, all of this was translated by Davison Perez, the interpreter for the Red Sox. And I started to see this pop up on social media a lot. And it was basically, how can the Red Sox translator be so bad? He's actually the one that led to this being more out of hand than it truly should have been. So let me read you some quotes that were retranslated by other speakers based on the time to sit down and not in the moment. And I will say this, it's not an easy job to hear somebody talk for 30 seconds and then translate what they just said. I would fail that job. I've been talking professionally speaking for 21 years. I would fail that job. I don't know how to do that. But here are the quotes as reinterpreted by others who had time to actually study what Devers said word for word and then translate it. After what happened with Casas, they came to me, and I know that I am a player, but I can't play all the positions either. I can't adapt like any other player to a different position. If I play first, they know I won't play at once and that I won't play the right way. In other words, it's going to take time for me to get good at the new position. That was kind of the thoughts for Devers, and that is also fair. He wants to be good at it if he's going to be asked to play it. But that is not a very good decision as it came to me. I don't know why it's being made right now. If they removed me from a position and told me to throw my glove away, that I was not going to play my position anymore, it's something like nonsense to ask me to play another position again. Now, that kind of tracks with what was said before, so I don't think the spirit was lost there. But it's where he told the team to basically go do its job that I thought it was the most interesting. They need to go do their job and look for another player. They go to the market, and I think it's going to be the best decision that they can learn to work with in their new job. Now, again, maybe we're outside of our lane telling different people how to do their job. The team for him and him for the team. But they didn't keep their word because they already made me change positions, and they themselves gave me the confidence it wasn't going to happen anymore. They didn't keep their word. That is what's the underlying issue here, was that you told somebody to expect one thing that under no circumstances should you expect another, and we are 6 weeks into the season, and he is already getting another. Now, some of this came down to some good cop, bad cop, where Alex Cora maybe had a conversation with him in the spring, didn't want to be involved this time. So then Craig Breslow had to be the bad cop and tell him this, and everybody got twisted around. And ultimately, we'll see if Devers ever ends up playing first base, or if the Red Sox, to quote Devers, go to the market to sort it out. But I'll point out to you, and then most Braves fans certainly know right now, if you're looking to make a trade to impact your team, it's probably not going to happen the first or second week of May. So they're going to have to figure some things out while Tristan Casas is down. But I thought that whole thing was fascinating, and I spent a lot of time here on it to go through it. But I've been sitting on it for about a week, and I think it does come down to you want to feel like all 26 guys in there have that kinship with one another where if something comes up and somebody's just got to jump on that grenade, that they're going to do it. And maybe that's a cliched sports thing. Maybe it ain't that serious. I don't know. But you just like to think that, hey, for a limited time, if you just need me to stand there and help out and make sure we don't drop the ball, basically, I'll do that. And you didn't really hear that there. And that's not to villainize Devers. I understand what he's going through, but it certainly took on a life of its own, that's for sure. Now, some other things, unfortunately, took on a life of their own after one of two of the crazy games we're going to talk about here. And the first of which was the Houston Astros taking a 13-9 loss at the hands of the Cincinnati Reds, who did something that will probably have Braves fans waking up in cold sweats, and that is scoring 10 runs in the first inning to win the game. It worked out about as poorly as you'd expect for the Houston Astros after a 10 spot got dropped on them, and if you own the home version of the game, then if you know, you know. But a 13-9 final, the Astros did fight back, but it was Lance McCullers, who was just back from missing a lot of time, who was this unfortunate starter for the Astros. But what happened after and maybe during the game was even more unfortunate, as some comments were made to McCullers on social media. I'll let him take it from there, and then we'll talk about the fallout.
It's been a tough evening. I understand people are very passionate and people love the Astros and love sports, but threatening to find my kids and murder them is a little bit tough to deal with. So, just as a father, I think there have been many threats over the years aimed at me mostly, and I think actually one or two people have, from other issues around baseball, actually had to go to jail for things like that. But I think bringing kids into the to the equation, threatening to find them, or next time they see us in public, they're gonna stab my kids to death. Things like that is tough to hear as a dad.
Yeah, I mean, who would in the world want to hear that? No one. According to multiple reports here, as this story will obviously be monitored and ongoing, police have been alerted to this situation. But for McCullers receiving death threats for his children, for his family, after a bad start, a lot of people immediately point at what has become kind of a pervasive element since then. And this is not new. I've heard players talk about this, and it's become a growing trend. If you ruin somebody's betting day, you might end up hearing death threats. So when Major League Baseball made the decision to take the money that's involved with sports betting and monetize it themselves, maybe they didn't envision these kinds of things being involved with it. Maybe these kind of things would have happened anyway. But either way, it's gone pretty poorly. And there have been instances where a betting influencer was sentenced to time for going after, lashing out at a player aggressively. But I don't think that that's a unique situation. But hopefully we can take a moment to kind of reflect on it and recognize that this kind of stuff really, really shouldn't be going on. Let's talk about another game that got completely out of hand and may have been the final straw for their manager. That's the Colorado Rockies, a historically bad team that's on pace to lose 137 ball games, I believe, by last count. They lost 21-0 on Saturday at Coors Field. A shutout at Coors Field. There have only been 28 of those, by the way, 9-inning complete game shutouts thrown there. And one of them was thrown by Stephen Kolek and the San Diego Padres, who, in just his second career start, pitched the most lopsided shutout victory since 1889. That's why I love stats. I love baseball for all the crazy things it can show you that you may go to a ball game and have never seen before and may never see again. But 21-0 dropped the Rockies to 7-33, and they proceeded to fire Bud Black on Sunday. Another interesting note, though, from that 21-0 loss, because people look at that and they're like, hey, it's a football score. You know how many 21-0 games there have been in the NFL recently? How about none in the last 6 years? That's from Jason Stark of The Athletic. So very much a football score. Maybe 21-0 at the half has happened a few times, but not as a final score. and the Rockies are going to be looking for new leadership, and I think they should start a little bit higher than manager, but those are just my thoughts. Speaking of managers who lost their job this week, Derek Shelton was the first of the 30 Major League managers to lose his job, and it happened as the Pittsburgh Pirates relieved him of duties on Thursday. Paul Skeens, of course, is kind of the face of the franchise here for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was asked his thoughts about the firing of their manager as they sat on one of the worst records in baseball. Maybe not as bad as the Rockies, but pretty bad anyway. Here's what Skeens had to say.
Unfortunately, I wasn't shocked at the end of the day. I mean, we're 12 and, I don't know, 27, 26, whatever it is. So someone's got to be held accountable. Unfortunately, right now it's him. It's just kind of how it goes. But I don't know that it fixes the root of the issue, which is that we need to play better. So that's been the messaging today. It's been the messaging for, a little bit now. And we still got to do that.
Well, if the messaging was go play better, they certainly listened to the Pirates. They took 2 out of 3 from the Braves over the weekend and improved their record to 14-27 on the year. One last story, as we talked about some managerial firings and things that have gone on this week. Also a hitting coach who lost his job in Texas, and a new or familiar face for the Rangers, certainly familiar face around these parts. All-star second baseman Brett Boone, who played briefly for the Atlanta Braves, is the new hitting coach of the Rangers after Donnie Ecker was fired. Ecker was the offensive coordinator for the Rangers. Just want to point that out. Not officially a hitting coach, but Boone is very excited to be saddling up and riding with Bruce Bochy again, who he played under during his career.
This came out of nowhere. There was no agenda. I wasn't looking to do this at this stage of my life, and it just happened. And I played for Bruce back in 2000. I've had a great relationship with him for 20-plus years. And I got a call. I thought about it. I was kind of stunned. I'm thinking, wow, I didn't expect this today. And, I discussed it with my wife for a minute, and it was obvious to me. I just thought, no, of course I have to do this. I have to go do this with Bruce, and I couldn't imagine a better tandem with CY at the top being the president and Bruce, the skipper, on the field. If I were going to come back and get acclimated back in the game, I couldn't imagine a better situation than doing it under Bruce Bochy.
Pretty cool opportunity for Brett Boone, who will begin his coaching career after having a very successful broadcasting and podcast career right here with Odyssey. You've heard him here on 92.9 The Game. I don't know if we'll hear him for the remainder of the season, but a new and challenging opportunity for him, for Brett Boone. When we come back, we're going to talk about the challenges of calling balls and strikes. Has it gotten more difficult this year? I'll ask Eno Saris of The Athletic to make heads or tails of the evolving strike zone. It comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond. Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer from Mark Spain Real Estate, 855-299-SOLD on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday night as we continue our trip around the big leagues. And this next story is something that certainly caught my attention when it popped up on my news feed not long ago. The Major League Baseball strike zone for 2025 being enforced perhaps more strictly than ever, but certainly smaller than it's ever been. I read a deep dive from The Athletic written by Jason Stark and Ken Rosenthal and my guest at this time, Eno Saris, who really looked into what exactly is going on behind the plate in 2025. Could you walk us through a little bit of what this change is and the reaction as you've heard it thus far?
Yeah, they changed the way that umpires are graded or how they're judged. And so technically it's not a rule book change of the strike zone the way it's enforced in the rule book, but it ends up being a change in way the strike zone plays, because as the umpires are judged, so go they in terms of their incentives, their incentive structure. What we've seen in the past is there was once a thing called QuestTech. It was the first piece of technology. It was tracking balls and strikes. As soon as that came online and started judging the umpires, they started getting better. And I know it might be hard for some people to believe that umpires have gotten better over the years, but they've gotten better and better and better. And in fact, as the technology has improved, so have the umpires. The young umpires that come up through the minors are now more used to being judged by the machines or have even better zones. So if you judge, how good they are at wrong calls, so that's balls called in the strike zone and strikes called out of the strike zone, they are the best they've ever been. this is the best they've ever been. But it also means that players that have been used to a certain size of strike zone are now dealing with the smallest strike zone ever. So it's kind of an interesting thing where it's like the most correct it's ever been, but it's also the smallest it's ever been. And so obviously there's some pitchers who have a little consternation at this fact.
Yeah, I can imagine. Some pitchers, probably some hitters, and even some catchers, which I'll get to in a moment, who might have been even taken by surprise here. So a lot of talk here in the article was about the buffer zone, which is how the umpires are, again, evaluated for accuracy, or at least part of that, in calling balls and strikes by the book. Because as you mentioned, it's not the strike zone that's changing. It's how the grading system is going for these umpires and maybe a bit more stringent. This seems like it'd be helpful on the surface, but there are players who were taken by surprise to see the shifting or shrinking of the zone. Saw a lot of different comments in this article, so I guess like anything, it takes some time to adjust to what the new version of maybe the thing that never changed was or is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first people that noticed it were analysts, research and development analysts that work on the numbers. They noticed it pretty quickly, and in fact, what this strike zone most resembles is last year's minor league strike zone, where they were using the challenge system. So in a way, this might be a sort of a preparation for using the challenge system. But the people that were maybe the most up in arms about it, the most that maybe noticed the quickest, were the catchers, because framing is a way they get paid. And right now, the average framer is a negative because we're judging them against how the strike zone used to play. And, one team with a great framer was looking at the numbers and said, well, why are his numbers so low? And they spent a whole day deep diving in that organization trying to figure out why their catchers' framing numbers are down. And they said, well, it's because the strike zone is different. So it has ramifications for how catchers are paid. It has ramifications for pitchers. One call, in our story, Logan Webb talks about one call can change the course of a game. It's something that they need to get used to, because we probably are going to see some version of the robots, in the future.
Yeah, and I do want to ask you about that a little bit, but talking about this strike zone, the change of it, and the rate improvement, according to an MLB official, the overall ball strike accuracy thus far this year is the highest it's ever been through this point of a season. And this season's strike calls are the most accurate since StatCast began tracking the pitches back in 2015. So that speaks to your point of it's as good as it's ever been. Can it get better? I think is a question we've been asking ourselves quite a lot. But the bit about the umpire asking one unnamed catcher, what do you think of the new strike zone? And having his response be, what new strike zone? You mentioned analysts and analytics departments for teams may have uncovered this pretty quickly, but was this not something that was really made not a public spectacle of, but not something that was announced to the players?
That change in the buffer zone was something that was collectively bargained between the umpires union and baseball. And so it was part of their private negotiations. When they sign that CBA, it becomes public. And so baseball says they took that information and they gave it to managers and they gave it to teams. And so they feel like they communicated well. Everybody, like we talked to GMs, we talked to executives, players, none of them had heard about this. And I think, here I'm editorializing a bit, but I think the way that players are now, they're very in tune for if there is a rule change. Because if there's a rule change, there's a committee that works on it, there's a big presentation in the spring, and they say, now you can't throw over 3 times, or there's a pitch clock, there's these big presentations, these are the new rules, you got to learn them. And so if it was given to them as a rule change, they would have all remembered it. Mm-hmm. So it's a possibility it was communicated to them as part of, here's an update on the CBA with the umpires. At which case, maybe some managers snoozed through that part.
Right.
Maybe it just didn't seem to have the same heft. But there's no way that it was communicated in a way that they were like, the strike zone will probably be different this year, because if that was true, then all these people, we talked to pitching coaches, directors of pitching, catchers, all sorts of people, none of them knew, and it seems like maybe they should have known.
No, it does seem like that. And you bring up a good point because we've seen an awful lot of rules changes in recent years, and there's always a kind of a public presentation of it, obviously, to the players who are going to have to learn it, but even for fans to kind of understand here is the way that the game is changing. And some of them might be to our great benefit. Others of them we'll debate until the end of time, quite possibly, but that's probably another discussion for another show. Chatting with Eno Saris of The Athletic here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. He joins me on the WadeFord.com hotline. As always, you can find his work in The Athletic, and we're talking about some changes to the strike zone, but it's really the same strike zone that it's always been, but unpacking the effects of it, that's, I think, really where everyone is spending some time getting to know it again, I guess, in 2025. But let's talk about the robots, if you will, the elephant in the room when it comes to watching a baseball game, at least for a large segment of fans, myself included, is establishing what exactly is a strike based on a zone that is consistent, that doesn't waver, that takes, at least in some part, the human element out of the call of the pitch. I mean, it's not going to take the human element out of the act of pitching, but I guess there's a lot to consider here. Certainly the game has been able to survive for decades and decades and decades and decades without this, but I guess in some ways, if the technology is there, why can't we use it? Might be the oversimplified approach to fixing, air quotes, the strike zone. I'm curious, where exactly do you land on bringing this technology into the game, the automated ball strike system, and exactly how far we take that technology?
I'm actually, you might be surprising, I am a numbers guy, but I'm not fully into automated balls and strikes. And it actually has something to do with how this went down. So if you do fully automated balls and strikes, what you're doing is you're handing full control of the strike zone to the commissioner. And in any given year, he can change it by an inch or 2 inches or shorten it or widen it or whatever it is. And then we'll be reporting on this every single year, and there'll be a new strike zone every year as he tries to fiddle with the dials to make the offense do what it wants to do for whatever it is he wants out of baseball. It's kind of a little bit too much power for me to give him, especially when they instituted automated balls and strikes in the minor leagues. Strikeouts and walks went through the roof at first, and both of them, which is kind of surprising. And I think what I've learned in the numbers is you can't necessarily model everything that's going to happen. You're not going to know exactly what's going to happen when you shrink the strike zone, when you play with the strike zone. Unexpected things happen. Another way I can say is the strike zone has been very different over the course of baseball, and yet the walk rate over the course of all of baseball has only ever been between 8.5% and 9.5%.
Wow.
It's never been any different, and yet the strike zone has been wildly different at times. So there's certain things that'll be the same, and there's certain things that will go awry, and I don't really want to be reporting on it every year. But the challenge system, did you see that in the spring? What did you think of the challenge system?
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing, and that's really what I wanted to ask you about. But I had not thought of any of this the way that you just laid it out in terms of the commissioner's office being able to throttle things back and forth and adjust the dials. But that pretty much is in line with, I think, a lot of the things we've seen, whether or not you believe that the balls have been different from year to year or different times in the year or whatnot. That's a whole thing I'm sure nobody wants to continue to report on year after year as well. But I think the challenge system is kind of the best of both worlds because, I mean, if you follow me on social, I know you do, and for anybody listening to this show, like, I don't enjoy watching calls change games or change at-bats and change innings that feel like it could be avoided. And it seems like the challenge system might be that great in-between, that compromise that could get you through those kinds of times and correct a little bit of the human error that I don't think is always in the best interest of the game or an inning. That's kind of where I land on it.
Yeah, it's really just a shame when a game ends on a bad call. That just leaves everyone have a bad taste in their mouth. And even a big inning, a rally being stifled late in the game, you just don't want those big ones going wrong. And the other thing it does, it preserves the catcher's ability to add value to the game in different ways, like framing, but also it preserves the sort of human relationship between the strike zone, the umpire, the hitter, the pitcher, the catcher. It's the human element, quote unquote, that some people think doesn't need to be there, but it's a level of chaos that's good for the game, I think. And the last thing is that the challenge system actually, to me, when I was watching in the spring, I thought it actually took the temperature down between players and umpires. Because before, when you're saying, "Oh, you're making bad calls, dude," like whatever, that wasn't a strike, that was whatever, that stuff. There's no way to take the steam out of that conversation. It's only headed towards somebody yelling at somebody and getting ejected. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's the only way that thing goes anywhere. In the spring, a batter would chirp, and the umpire would say, "Challenge it." I actually saw umpires saying that to players, and I saw players laughing, and some of them challenging and some of them not, right? Because you only have a limited amount of challenges. You have like 3 challenges. You have to get it right to keep it. It has to be immediate. And there's an audience part of it, too, where once there's a challenge, it goes up on the board, and we all get to watch.
Yeah.
We all get to, oh, it was a strike, So, like, there's a kind of a fun element to it. We're in the entertainment business. So I thought there was a lot of good things to it. And one last thing that people might not even think of is if we make an automated balls and strike system where there's basically just like a green light or a buzzer goes off and you hit the strike zone, we may incentivize the weirdest type of pitching you've ever seen. You might, the types of calls that are not made right now are breaking balls that clip a little part of the bottom of the zone and then hit the plate.
Oh, yeah.
Or breaking balls, sideways breaking balls, sweepers that clip a tiny bit of the outside part of the plate and get caught like a 1.5 feet past the plate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so we may incentivize an army of Sergio Romos and Rich Hills
yeah,
that just come out here and throw the bendiest pitches that barely make the light go green. And that, I don't know if that's what we want either. So that's I was just wanted to point to some of the weird outcomes that can happen when you turn it over to the machines.
No, and that's the kind of stuff that it's just great to be able to have these conversations. And I know you're inside the numbers and looking at these and also looking at the game through the scope of someone who enjoys what they're watching, who wants to see the best possible product. And I think ultimately that's where the sweet spot's going to be in making whatever adjustments they can to maybe not so much to the strike zone, but how it's interpreted and maybe how it's enforced. We'll find out with the ABS system. And when exactly it shows up, I guess we'll start to feel what this could do for the game in a number of different ways. But, Eno, thank you so much. I appreciate the time as always. Let everybody know where they can find you. And, of course, you have a great podcast as well. I want to give you time to plug that.
Yeah, I'm on the socials at ENOSARRIS, all over the place. And Rates and Barrels is my podcast. We're a daily podcast that kind of looks through this lens. And we've got Trevor May and Jed Lowry, some former players, but I bring the analyst energy, and it's fun. There's some fantasy portion of it, but it's also just about real baseball and figuring it out. So thank you so much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. You guys make sure you subscribe to Rates and Barrels. He is Eno Sarris of The Athletic. Follow him on social. And Eno, I look forward to catching up with you down the road.
All right, thank you.
When we come back, we will turn our attention back to what's going on with the Atlanta Braves, and we'll do it next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Taking a look around the league with more of our From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We're live from the Kia Studios, closing out another weekend, closing out this edition of the show. We're going to get back on track with our Braves discussion, which unfortunately hit another sour note over the weekend with a 2-3 series loss to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Talked a little bit earlier about what's gone on with the Colorado Rockies, a club that was able to win a game at the Braves' expense that kept Atlanta from a sweep, and I felt like it derailed a little bit of the goodwill that the Braves have been building for a while. Then a 4-3 homestand followed. Okay. Then you lose 2-3 to the Pittsburgh Pirates, the only team that has scored fewer runs than the Colorado Rockies, a club that is 7-33 and just fired its manager to follow the trend of the Pittsburgh Pirates, I guess. Yeah, that's the team you have lost 2-3 to this weekend. Nothing to do about it, but move on to the next series. But, man, just one of those that feels like a missed opportunity for this club, and there have been a handful of those this year. Those I talked about at the very open of this show. The Braves are 14-8 in their last 22 games, so winning at about a 650 clip, 640 clip, whatever that is, winning percentage-wise, that'll play over 162. How they're doing it, though, has been questionable at best thanks to the questionable offense. The pitching staff has really been carrying this club. Now, how far can the pitching staff carry them over the course of the 162-game marathon is fair to question. Because last year, Atlanta's pitching was about as good as it gets, but things have changed. Some names have changed this year, certainly. And I think you're just going to have to count on getting this good pitching, at least in the interim, until you can figure out things offensively. So as the Braves get set to come home this week, they'll get their first look at the Washington Nationals in 2025 as they open up a 4-game series. And then they're going to hit the road for 6 more games. They'll get what is referred to as an off day. That's going to happen between those 2 series. The Braves will not have had one for 17 games in a row there. And you want to throw in a few more hours spent at the ballpark, certainly, with the rain delays that they had on the recent homestand. Atlanta has been very, very baseball-centric, of course. So 3 games in Boston and 3 in Washington. So you're going to see the Nationals for 7 of the next 10 games. But can your pitching stand up is going to be one of the questions. And while we have talked about how good it has been overall, this pitching staff, and I'll get back to it a little bit more in a moment, there is one guy that I think is drawing more questions than others, and that, of course, is Raisel Iglesias. If you've been wondering what's going on with him, I promise you're not alone. There were some really good signs, I felt like, on the homestand. A couple of appearances where you looked at it and thought, okay, that looks more like the Raisel Iglesias who was one of the best closers in baseball a year ago and seemed like Mr. Automatic for the most part. But this year, it's been the home run ball that has really bitten Raisel Iglesias. And though it didn't hurt him on Sunday, he was unable to preserve the tie and give the Braves a chance to go to extra innings, which I got a stat on that in a minute, which is pretty wild. But the Pittsburgh Pirates walked off Raisel Iglesias in the bottom of the 9th inning. But now, in 15 innings this year, Iglesias has allowed 6 home runs. That was coming into Sunday. Last year, he allowed 4 home runs in 69 1/3 innings. And the year prior to that, he allowed 7 home runs over the course of the entire season. So in about a month and a half's worth of work, Raisel Iglesias has become one of the most homer-prone relievers, certainly in high leverage, of any club in baseball. And he's going to have to get that all sorted out. And I'm not sure what the answer is for him. You look at the pitch usage, that's certainly something you can go back to the lab and kind of maybe figure out different ways. But even doing that, it just seems like there's just something that's not quite right for Iglesias. And I thought maybe early in the season it was infrequent use. The Braves lost their first 7 games, so he came out of spring training all ramped up, ready to go, and there are no games to be saved. So I felt like that might be a little bit of a factor in there. Maybe it is. And then the Braves have kind of used him here and there and then tried to stay away from him the last couple of days to give him, I think, a mental and a physical reset. Obviously, the Sunday results notwithstanding, we'll see what comes of that. But Raisel Iglesias just has not looked like himself this year, and the Braves are going to need that to get sorted out because when you look at some of the other guys in this bullpen that have been shining, how about Pierce Johnson, who was on a major roll? 26 consecutive batters set down before a double ruined that on Saturday or ended his streak. That surpassed John Smoltz for the 3rd longest streak of batters retired by a reliever. So it took, 9 appearances for Pierce Johnson to do that. But he came within and out, if you want to call it that, of a perfect game over the course of several weeks. But Pierce Johnson was expected to play a big role, and he definitely is. That's some really good work for him. But here's somebody who was not expected to be, I don't think, a major factor in the Braves bullpen, but has had some pretty important innings here lately, and that's Scott Blewett. Once you get through all the jokes about a reliever being named Blewett, who now takes over for Aaron Bummer as perhaps the most unfortunate last name for a relief pitcher. But jokes aside, there's been nothing funny about what Blewett has done out there on the mound. He has been nails thus far. You look at his last few appearances in particular, last 4 innings that he pitched across 3 outings. They were all in extra innings. Every single one of them began with a runner at second base because Rob Manfred likes to play baseball that way, and Scott Blewett was unscored upon. That's some pretty good work. And you kind of wonder, just based on what we've seen from him, and obviously that kind of high leverage performance as well, there are 2 clubs already gave up on him this year. The Twins designated him for assignment, and the Orioles picked him up. The Orioles can use all the pitching they can get, but they also designated him for assignment, and by the middle of April, he found himself in the Braves organization and thus in the Braves' big league plans here, at least for a little while. I think he's looked extremely good. And you'll take all the contributions you can get from whoever you can get them from. Some really good pitching, though, overall has been carrying this club. I talked about that here a moment ago, but let me give you the numbers on that. Last 21 games coming in, and the Braves did allow, 4 runs in this game, but overall, A 3.47 ERA for the Braves, second best in the National League over the last 21 games, which is in line with the team that led baseball in ERA, that's staff ERA, at 3.49 a year ago. So they're getting the pitching. The pitching is there. The pitching, even if it doesn't seem the same as last year, right now, after that 7-game disaster at the start of the year, has normalized. It's gotten back to what it needs to be. Now, can the offense get back to that? That's the question, because the offense, the bats right now are in the middle of the pack at best. And approaching the bottom third of the league over the same stretch of the Braves pitching staff being so good, they're just not getting much, offensively speaking, at least not in the regular, consistent approach that you're expecting to see. Runs per game, maybe. You need to see that come up a little bit. Then you can look at one of the crazier things about this Braves club this year. Atlanta, a team that has trouble scoring runs, has managed to go 5-0 in extra innings, which always seemed to be kind of an Achilles heel for this club of sorts, and it has not been this year. They would have liked to. I mean, ideally, they would have gone to extra innings on Sunday and figured out a way to beat the Pittsburgh Pirates. Sean Murphy gave them that chance with that 3-run double, which, again, it wasn't looking so good until then, and obviously it didn't end well, but at least some show of life, offensively speaking, and a couple of buttons that got hit by Brian Snitker at the right time, at least there, was pinch running Stuart Fairchild from Marcell Ozuna, who then scored from first on that double, and obviously the man who hit the double, Sean Murphy, pinch hitting for Drake Baldwin, who was 2 for 2 already on the day. But some extra innings work for the Braves this year. 5-0. That's a silver lining. I don't know if we're looking for those in the middle portion of May, but I'll give you a little bit of everything I got here. The difference maker for this team, though, and let's look at big picture entire season. We talked about the pitching. That's going pretty well. We talked about the offense, maybe not so great, but something that has been consistently good for this team by and large. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but the work with the leather. The Braves are a top 3 defense by just about every advanced measure that you look at. So they're making the plays, which would correlate because you look at how good the pitching has been. Obviously, that goes hand in hand with what your defense is doing for you, and it is way up from the last few seasons. I went back and looked, and the Braves have been middle of the pack at best, defensively speaking. And now they're a top 3 team. And you want to know why they're a top 3 team? Because Nick Allen has been an absolute standout at shortstop. He made a couple of more good plays today than I thought. Just they match the eye test, and they pretty much match up with everything else he's been doing. But of all fielders at every position, Nick Allen was second in Major League Baseball at 8 outs above average. That was behind only Pete Crow Armstrong, who's been a standout for the Chicago Cubs this year. And his range factor, according to Fangraphs, also second only to Pete Crow Armstrong. If you had Nick Allen being the defensive standard, gold glove caliber shortstop of the Atlanta Braves here heading into the middle of May, then congratulations, because I really didn't think last November that he was going to be a major factor on the big league club, but he has taken away the starting shortstop job and run away with it. And Orlando Arcia, we're not seeing too much of him, and when we are, just don't ask him to bunt. That did not go particularly well this past week. Also, someone else to not overlook when it comes to defense and what's been going on there is Matt Olson. First basemen have a really hard time making the defensive list. And if you've ever looked at it, and I don't know how many people are interested in this, but it's my show and I got a few minutes left, and I'm going to ask the question anyway. How is wins above replacement calculated? And one of the things that always hurts first baseman is defense, because it's one of the least valuable positions on the field according to the formula that goes into WAR. You just don't see guys getting the boost from their defense like a great center fielder with a ton of range, or even when Fangraphs brought in catchers framing into how they do wins above replacement. All of a sudden, catchers started getting a boost because defensively they matter more. At first base, you're just expected to basically stand there and catch every throw and not make a mistake ever. And if you do, you're not a good first baseman. That's basically seems to be the level here that we're measuring or scoring the first baseman. But Matt Olson over there is also top 10 and outs above average, and that is extremely hard to do for a first baseman. He's been very good. That throw to third the other day against Cincinnati in extra innings to get Ellie De La Cruz before he could, no pun intended, cruise on over there and maybe give the Reds a chance to win that game, that was a heads-up instinctual baseball play. And I've seen Matt Olson make some throws this year to bases that have just underscored how valuable he can be over there at first base. So it may not have been happening with the bat right now for Matt, but he's making the plays where he needs to in the field, and that kind of stuff adds up. It does matter. Now, the Braves, as I mentioned, are in the midst of a run of 17 games without an off day. And that will continue with one more week of action here. 4 games against the Washington Nationals, and then 3 games at Fenway Park against the Red Sox. So what's that going to look like over the next 4 games? How about probable pitchers for that National Series? Grant Holmes will get the opener. And then you're going to see Spencer Schwellenbach in Game 2, Bryce Elder in Game 3, and A.J. Smith-Shawver will start in Game 4. Of course, we heard from Elder and Smith-Shawver earlier in the show. If you missed those, you can check them out by subscribing to From the Diamond, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find them on the Odyssey app if you want to connect with them that way. And then on Friday, that's a great question about the return of Spencer Strider. Could it happen that soon? Will we see it this coming weekend at Fenway Park against the Red Sox? Maybe give Chris Sale an extra day as well in the midst of that if you wanted to. That's something that worked out extremely well for the Braves last year. I had some people question that. I pointed out on social media because I asked Brian Snitker about it. Would you like to have 6 starters? If they're all throwing well, yes. I think that could be helpful right now. Will it work all season long? I'm not so sure about that. But there are times throughout the season, and the Braves have done this about as well or better than any other club, of just having that supplemental arm that's in there that helps out some of the other guys. And you can look at most of the stats last year, they will back it up. And even as well as some of them pitched on 4 days rest, it was because I feel like the innings were managed appropriately over the course of the year where you could really expect them to be on regular rest. Pitching every 5th day, but pitching every 6th day over the course of the year, I think could be helpful. And it could help somebody like Strider out with a little bit more recovery in between starts. It certainly helped Chris Sale and Reynaldo Lopez out last year. It doesn't mean that they'll never get hurt or never be sore. But I think it's something that ultimately benefited the club on the whole. So Holmes, Schwellenbach, Elder, and Smith-Shawver will be facing the Washington Nationals at Truist Park. That'll get started on Monday. 7:15 games for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Then a 12:15 business person special on Thursday before the Braves will head up to Boston where they will face the Red Sox in a couple of night games on Friday and Saturday. And then on Sunday afternoon at 1:35, they will wrap that up. So the week ahead for the Braves, you got to make hay where you can against another sub-500 team, the Washington Nationals. And then you're going to have your hands full, it sounds like, with the Boston Red Sox. They've been pretty good this year. So it will continue to be a challenge, but they've all been a challenge for the Braves. Can they find the consistency offensively? That, I think, is going to be what ultimately helps separate the Braves from their competition on a daily basis. I want to thank Eno Saris of The Athletic for joining me this week. A great conversation. Really enjoyed that, hearing about everything that went on with the strike zone and the changes of it that maybe we didn't know about. Also, my thanks to Bryce Elder and A.J. Smith-Shawver for making some time for me this week. And you heard those conversations on From the Diamond as well. Thanks to my producer, Garrett, for doing all the great work on the other side of the glass. And I will look forward to catching up with you guys next week from 5 to 7 right here on From the Diamond for 2 great hours of baseball talk. We're with you each and every week. That'll do it, though, for this edition of From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. And until next week, so long, everyone.